In today's lesson, we are going to have some trigonometric graphs that are stretched vertically or horizontally. So if we are looking at our first example, which is y equals 3 times cosine theta, this graph is going to be stretched vertically, and it's because we have the multiplier of 3 in front of the cosine theta. So the first thing we are going to do is quickly make a table of values where I am going to substitute in only a few points to find the main points of the graph. So the first thing I will do is substitute in for theta. So I'm going to substitute in again 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and the last point we substitute in is 2 pi. So if I'm substituting in for 0 for cosine, you know that it is measured on the x-axis. So if you substitute in 0, you would get 1 for the value of 1 for cosine, which then we have to multiply by 3, so we are going to get 0, 3. At pi over 2, which is at 90 degrees, cosine is 0, and if I multiply it by 3, I still get 0. At pi, which is 180 degrees, cosine is negative 1, and if I multiply that by 3, I get negative 3. And at 3 pi over 2, which is 270 degrees, cosine is going to be 0. So if I multiply it by 3, I get 0. And at 2 pi, I am going to get again 3 because the 2 pi is the same point as my starting point. So then I'm going to start graphing. So at 0, we have 3. And at pi over 2, we have 0. At pi, we have negative 3. At 3 pi over 2, we have 0. And at 2 pi, we have 3 again. So I'm just going to connect these points with a curve. And you can see how this is one period of the cosine graph. And I can actually continue the graph to the left. If I wanted to, I can graph these points right here and end up having the left-hand side or the negative angles of the graph also. In this next example, we'll have to sketch the graph y equals cosine 3 times theta. So in this case, the amplitude, which is the multiplier of the cosine, is 1, so the amplitude will be 1. But the graph has to be shrunk 3 times smaller, so that means I will need to fit 3 cosine graphs over the 2 pi period. So the first thing I will do is graph my regular normal cosine graph, which will start at 1, and at pi over 2, which is right here, I will have 0. Then at pi, I have negative 1. Then again, I have 0, and then I will have 1. So I'm just graphing. This is just a regular normal cosine graph without any kind of shrinking. I'm going to continue on the opposite side. So we are going to do the graph this way. So I'm going to continue just to the opposite side of the graph. Now I need to decide how to fit 3 graphs over the entire section of 2 pi. So I need to fit 3 graphs over 2 pi. So what that means is that my period is going to be a third of the length of my normal period. So the period of the graph is going to be 2 pi divided by 3. So the graph, one cycle or one period of the graph will end on 2 pi over 3. So this will be the last point where I have to be. The last point of the cosine graph is 1. So at 2/3 pi, I need to graph 1. And that's the last point. And the first point is still going to be 1. So now I need to, in this space, fit an entire cosine graph. So I'm going to split these two squares into equal parts, 4 equal parts. And I know that here I am going to have my 0, here I will have my -1, and here I have my 0 again. So if you connect these points, you have a cosine graph that is a third shorter than over 2 pi, so its period is only 2 pi over 3. So now I can continue graphing more. So I'm going to do my second one, which is going to be here, and I'm again dividing the space into 4 equal parts. So I'm going to land over here. So now I have two graphs over 4/3 pi, and now I'm going to do my last graph. So that's going to, again, I have to divide the space into 4 equal parts and go ahead and graph my cosine graph. So you can see on my graph with the red that I have one, let me go ahead and point it to you. I have one cycle, a second cycle, and the third cycle of the cosine graph over the 2 pi section. So that's why my period is only 2 pi over 3 for one cycle, right? And then I have an amplitude of 1. I'm just going to complete the left-hand side of the graph so you can see it there too. So let's go ahead and put a point here and here. And we are going to again split the space into 4 pieces. So I am going to graph backwards. So you can see that over -2 pi, again, I have 3 cycles of the graph.